Welcome to the Book Nook. I am so glad you're here with us today for another deep dive. Whether you are, prepping for a big meeting, folding a mountain of laundry, or just insanely curious about how the human mind works, we are thrilled you're hanging out with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, everyone. We have a really fascinating one today.
We do. And, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this heavy expectation of like precision, right?
Right. Definitely. Like mechanical engineering almost.
Exactly. It's like you fall, you break your arm, and the x-ray shows that jagged, undeniable white line in the bone, and the doctor just points at the illuminated screen and says, "There it is."
Right. Because it's entirely binary in those situations.
Yeah.
You know, it's broken or not broken. It's diseased or it's healthy.
Yeah, it's clean. You get the hum of the fluorescent light box in the doctor's office, the stark, unarguable contrast of black and white, and honestly, as patients, we crave that.
We really do.
We want the mechanic to just look under the hood of our bodies and definitively declare, here's the broken belt, we will replace it, and you will drive away.
Well, we crave it because it absolves us of ambiguity, right? Like if the problem is purely mechanical, the solution is purely mechanical.
Right.
It requires nothing of our psychology, our character, or our spirit. It requires a cast or a prescription.
But then you step into the world of neurodevelopment or trauma or chronic systemic illness,
Yeah.
like autoimmune disorders, unexplained chronic fatigue, severe emotional paralysis.
Yeah, and suddenly that metaphorical x-ray machine is just completely broken.
Completely. We find ourselves staring at this diagnostic landscape that is the absolute definition of muddy waters.
And those muddy waters are exactly where we are going today. For this deep dive, we are taking your specific fascination with human psychology, healing, and self-sabotage, and we are aiming it directly at one of the most provocative concepts in modern wellness.
I am so ready for this. We are looking at a really landmark text today, right?
Yeah, we are. We're diving into Why People Don't Heal and How They Can by Caroline Myss, PhD. It was published back in 1997. And the mission of our analysis today is to explore a frankly shocking premise.
Yeah, shocking is the right word.
The argument that not everyone who is sick actually wants to heal. We are going to meticulously map out the psychological, emotional, and, energetic roadblocks that we subconsciously construct to block our own recovery.
Which, we have to admit right out of the gate, sounds deeply counterintuitive.
Oh, people hate hearing it.
I bet.
Yeah.
Because if you pitch that idea to the average person, they are going to balk. Wait, isn't it human nature to want to be healthy?
You would think so, yes.
Right. Human biology is wired for survival. Every cell in our body is programmed to seek homeostasis, to repair damage, to survive. It sounds almost insulting to suggest someone would actively choose to stay in pain or remain sick. Let's unpack this.
It does sound insulting if you don't look at the psychology beneath it, but it's a phenomenal text. And even though it came out in 97, its diagnosis of our modern culture feels almost prophetic today.
Totally.
So Myss worked for years as a medical intuitive. And for those unfamiliar with the term, her work involved assessing the energetic, emotional, and psychological factors that contribute directly to physical illness.
So she wasn't looking at the physical x-ray.
Exactly. She was looking at the emotional load the patient was carrying. And she didn't sit down to write a book about people refusing to heal, actually. She stumbled into this realization by observing a massive, unavoidable pattern in her clients.
A pattern that is honestly kind of everywhere once you know what to look for.
Right. To understand the mechanics of why someone would subconsciously sabotage their own healing, we have to rewind to a cultural phenomenon she observed taking root in the late 1980s. She coined a very specific term for it.
Yes, woundology. I love this term.
It's so accurate. Woundology.
The study of, the science of, or perhaps the religion of being wounded. Let's build the historical context here for everyone listening, because to understand woundology, we have to understand what it was reacting against.
Right. So prior to the 1980s, Western culture was largely defined by a stoic repression of trauma. The prevailing attitude toward childhood abuse, domestic turmoil, or just deep psychological pain was to bury it.
The classic, we don't talk about that family dynamic.
Exactly. You did not speak of it outside the home. You maintained a facade of absolute normalcy. But as the holistic health and consciousness movements began to flourish in the late 70s and early 80s, a massive, necessary cultural correction took place.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, psychoanalysis became mainstream. People began to open up. The cultural mandate shifted to, you must bring your darkness into the light to heal it.
Which is undeniably a positive step. Repression breeds pathology. We know that. Bringing the trauma out of the shadows is step one in any therapeutic model.
It is essential. But Myss noticed a fascinating and, honestly, disturbing secondary effect.
Yeah.
A specific subset of people took this new cultural permission to share their trauma and essentially
I
weaponized it.
weaponized it. That's heavy.
They did. They did not use the sharing as a bridge to move through the wound. They used the sharing to set up permanent residence inside the wound. The trauma became their defining characteristic,
So they basically got stuck in the sharing phase.
completely paralyzed by it. And the test provides a quintessential, almost unbelievable example of this taking place in the late spring of 1988. Myss was visiting the Findhorn community, which is located in northeastern Scotland.
Oh, yes. For those who haven't encountered it, Findhorn is a famous, intentional spiritual community. It's set against the rugged beauty of the Scottish Highlands.
It's gorgeous.
Right. With members living in these beautifully converted turn-of-the-century hotels and eco-villages, the population is entirely dedicated to spiritual growth, organic living, meditation, holistic healing. If you were going to design a laboratory for ultimate human wellness, you would build Findhorn.
It is the apex of the healing retreat. So Myss is there to teach a workshop. She is sitting in the communal dining room having lunch with two gentlemen she has just met.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. A close friend of hers, a woman named Mary, joins the table. Myss introduces Mary to the two men. They are literally in the middle of shaking hands when another member of the community, a man named Wayne, walks up to the table to ask Mary a question.
A completely normal question, right?
Utterly mundane. Wayne says, "Mary, are you busy on June 8th? We're looking for someone to escort a guest coming to Findhorn for the day."
It is the most innocuous scheduling question imaginable. Can you volunteer on a Tuesday?
But Mary's reaction is thermonuclear. Her body language shifts instantly. She bristles, her tone becomes aggressive and dripping with resentment, and she snaps at Wayne. Keep in mind, this is in front of two complete strangers she just shook hands with. She says, "June 8th. Absolutely not. June 8th is my incest support group meeting, and I would never, ever miss that meeting."
Oh, wow.
She goes on, "We count on each other. We incest victims have to be there for one another. I mean, who else do we have?"
It is hard to even process that level of escalation. I mean, that is 0 to 60 in half a second, deployed against a man simply asking about a calendar date.
Wayne, who is apparently somewhat accustomed to this dynamic, just politely thanks her and retreats. But Myss is floored.
I would be too. I'd just be staring at my salad.
Right. She sits with this uncomfortable energy through the rest of the lunch. Afterward, she gently confronts her friend. She asks Mary, "Why on earth did you feel the need to broadcast your entire deeply traumatic history to these strangers just to answer a scheduling question? Why not just say, 'I'm sorry, I have a prior commitment'?"
And what we're really asking here is, like, what was the psychological utility of dropping that bomb in that specific moment? Because it certainly wasn't about her schedule.
Right,
It was
right.
about controlling the oxygen in the room.
Exactly. But Mary does not see the utility. She only sees her own righteousness. She becomes incredibly defensive with Myss. Her tone goes ice cold, she stiffens, and she essentially delivers an ultimatum.
To her friend.
Yes, she says, "I answered that way because I am a victim of incest, and you clearly just do not have the compassion to understand." And then she throws her napkin on the table and walks away,
Oh, wow.
ending the lunch and effectively damaging the friendship. And in that exact moment, Myss realizes that she and Mary are no longer speaking the same language. Mary is speaking the language of woundology. Her wound has become her primary interface with humanity.
I want to spend a moment on the mechanics of what Mary did, because it forces us to look at how trauma, once it becomes an identity, is utilized in social settings. When I read that passage, the immediate analogy that came to mind was carrying around a VIP victim pass.
Ooh, I like that. Walk us through the mechanics of the VIP pass. How does that operate in a social dynamic?
Well, think about the power dynamic in that dining room. The second Mary flashes that card, the air is immediately sucked out of the space. All normal social contracts are suspended.
Right.
If Mary is rude, it must be excused because she is suffering. If she is demanding, she must be accommodated. By leading with her ultimate vulnerability, she actually establishes absolute dominance.
That is so true. Nobody can criticize her.
Nobody can ask anything more of her. The VIP pass instantly absolves you of normal adult responsibilities and guarantees that you are the unassailable center of sympathetic attention. Like, if I am holding the VIP wound pass, everyone in the room has to defer to my emotional state.
That is a piercing analysis of the power dynamic.
Yeah.
And Myss's source material corroborates that exact mechanism. Sharing trauma had subtly mutated from a brave act of vulnerability into a twisted bonding ritual.
A shortcut to intimacy.
Yes, a shortcut to manufactured intimacy and a tool for social manipulation. And the very next day, at this same workshop, Myss experiences it again.
You're kidding.
No, she sits down next to a woman she has never met and asks a simple introductory question. Just, what's your name? The woman doesn't even make eye contact. She just launches into a monologue, stating, I'm a victim of incest, I'm 56, I'm over it, my support group meets weekly.
She overrides the request for her actual name to present her trauma as her primary identifier. Her name is secondary to her wound.
Myss literally has to ask for her name a second time, and the woman ignores the question again to continue detailing her process and her sharing. Wounds had become the primary social currency.
It's wild.
And Myss documents another incredibly telling example of a woman who explicitly stated to her social circle that the prerequisite for being her friend was agreeing to honor her wounds.
Which, I mean, sounds very therapeutic and enlightened on the surface, but how does honoring my wounds translate into actual human behavior?
In practical application, it translated into total social tyranny. Yeah. This woman explained to her friends that because she was actively processing her childhood violations, she was subject to severe mood swings and periods of deep depression. Honoring her wound meant that her friends were strictly forbidden from challenging those moods.
Oh, geez.
If she entered the room in a state of despair, her friends were not allowed to introduce humor, lightness, or alternative perspectives. They were contractually obligated to lower their own emotional frequency to match her depression. And she made it clear she expected this dynamic to last for years.
That is the VIP pass becoming a literal anchor dragging the entire community down. It is manipulation masked in the vocabulary of therapy.
Exactly.
But I have to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate, because we are treading in dangerous territory. Isn't it incredibly healthy to find support groups? I mean, if you have survived something horrific, finding a room full of people who genuinely understand the specific, nuanced contours of your pain is often the only thing that keeps people alive. We don't want to pathologize the concept of support. So at what specific point does a support group stop being a lifeline and start being an anchor?
That is the critical tension in this entire theory. And Myss does not dismiss the necessity of support. Support groups are absolutely vital for the initial stages of recovery.
Right, you need them.
When you are first identifying the wound, when you are first pulling it out of the darkness, you require witnesses. You need validation that what happened to you was real and that it was wrong. But there is a deeply insidious sociological dynamic that can take hold if you aren't vigilant.
What happens?
Well, if your entire social architecture, your closest friendships, your weekend plans, your daily phone calls is built entirely upon the foundation of a shared wound, then healing becomes a direct threat to your social survival.
Oh, wow. Because if you get better, you lose your membership card. You don't belong in the club anymore.
Exactly. The unspoken underlying criterion for remaining in that specific social ecosystem is a continued, demonstrable need for support. To stay a part of the group, you must prove that you are still unhealed.
That is so heavy.
And Myss highlights how deeply this infects romantic relationships as well. She observed people attending these intensive workshops with the explicit goal of finding soulmates. But their definition of a soulmate was simply someone who had endured the exact same specific childhood trauma.
They're seeking a trauma twin.
But a romantic partnership built purely on the architecture of shared injury is incredibly fragile. What happens when one partner decides they have processed the pain, they're ready to release the past, and they want to move forward into a healthy, joyous life?
The other partner is left behind.
The other partner doesn't feel inspired. They feel abandoned. The foundational contract of the relationship, our shared brokenness, has been breached, and the partnership often disintegrates.
Because they were bonded by the disease, not the cure. To answer my own question about when the support group becomes the anchor, I want to pull in the analogy Myss borrows from the Buddha. It is one of the most striking metaphors in the book.
Yes, the raft.
The Buddha compared his teachings, and by extension, any therapeutic tool or support system, to a raft. The raft is non-negotiable. You need it to cross the treacherous, raging river of your trauma. You will drown without it.
Right.
But once you successfully navigate the rapids and reach the other shore, you don't pick the heavy, waterlogged raft up, strap it to your back, and carry it with you through the forest for the rest of your life. You leave the raft at the riverbank, and you walk forward on dry land.
The tragedy of woundology is watching people drag that heavy wooden raft through the forest 20 years after they cross the river, insisting that the raft is their actual body. A support group should be the vehicle that transports you across the trauma. It is not designed to be a permanent substitute family.
So, if woundology is the overarching cultural trap we've constructed, How do we justify staying in it on an individual psychological level? Nobody wakes up and says, I think I'll ruin my own life today by clinging to my past.
No, it's subconscious.
The author identifies 5 specific myths, deeply entrenched, largely subconscious beliefs that block our ability to put the raft down.
And these 5 myths are the psychological scaffolding that keeps the illness in place. The first myth is arguably the most pervasive, the belief that my life is defined by my wound.
Okay, let's break that down.
This is the internalized narrative that because you endured a specific trauma, your entire life's trajectory has been permanently altered, permanently damaged, and inherently limited. You begin to look at every new experience, every new romantic partner, every new career opportunity exclusively through the lens of that original injury.
Like, if you were betrayed once, you preemptively assume all future partners will betray.
That way.
Which, again, we must acknowledge is a completely natural biological trauma response in the immediate aftermath of an event. Your brain is trying to protect you from a secondary injury, but adopting that heightened state of threat assessment as your permanent identity is where the myth takes root.
The question Myss asks is, what is the hidden psychological payoff for holding on to this myth? Why would the human brain prefer the identity of the wounded person?
Right. Why?
Because it grants you permission to lead a life of minimum expectation.
Oh, let's drill into that. A life of minimum expectation. If I accept the premise that I am permanently damaged goods, then the pressure is off.
Absolutely.
Society cannot expect me to achieve greatness. My family cannot expect me to be a consistently reliable partner. I have a built-in excuse for every shortcoming.
And crucially, you cannot fail. If you never attempt the difficult career path or the vulnerable relationship because your wound supposedly prevents you from doing so, you entirely bypass the terrifying vulnerability of actual failure. You never have to test your limits if you predetermine that your limits were permanently capped by your trauma.
It's a defense mechanism.
The text illustrates this with a deeply frustrating but illuminating story about a man named Frank who attended one of Myss's workshops. Frank was entirely consumed by this first myth.
What was his story?
His constant looping narrative was that he possessed the raw intellect to be a brilliant research scientist or a top-tier doctor, but his potential had been permanently destroyed because his grade school teachers had criticized him too harshly.
Wait, grade school? We are talking about a grown man using a critique from elementary school to justify his entire adult existence.
Yes, he used this early, admittedly painful humiliation to justify a lifetime of taking low-level jobs that did not challenge him, and he weaponized this story.
How so?
During the workshop, whenever anyone shared a story of overcoming adversity, Frank became hostile. At one point, a highly successful physician in the group shared the details of his own incredibly difficult, abusive background.
And Frank didn't like that.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Instead of finding inspiration, Frank dismissed the doctor entirely, loudly claiming that the doctor hadn't actually healed, he was merely repressing his pain.
Wow.
The tension escalated until Frank finally stood up, announced to the room that no one there had suffered as profoundly as he had, and he stormed out of the workshop.
Let's analyze Frank's reaction to that, doctor, because it is incredibly telling. Frank had to protect his identity as the most wounded person in the room at all costs, because if he admitted that this doctor had suffered an equal or greater trauma and still managed to put himself through medical school and build a successful life, it would instantly invalidate Frank's entire excuse for his own life.
Exactly.
If the doctor could succeed, Frank's failure was his own choice. And that realization was a psychological annihilation that Frank's ego simply could not survive. So he fled the room.
He chose the familiar misery of his wound over the terrifying accountability of his potential. Now, the text brilliantly contrasts Frank with another attendee named Allison.
Allison had a very different approach.
Very different. Allison was dealing with a severe cancer diagnosis. If anyone had the right to claim the ultimate victim role, to say her life was defined and ruined by this illness, it was her. But Allison recognized the seductive pull of this myth.
She felt it.
She felt it creeping into her psyche, and she aggressively rejected it. She refused to let the painful present dictate the narrative of her future. She took radical, uncompromising responsibility for her internal mindset, stripping away any secondary gain she might get from being the cancer patient.
And Myss notes that Allison's cancer subsequently went into remission. She survived because she refused to merge her core identity with her disease.
Exactly. It's that shift.
It is the profound linguistic and psychological shift from saying, this terrible thing is happening to me, to, I am this terrible thing. Frank became his wound. Allison observed hers.
Which leads us directly into the second myth, which deals with our external environment. Myth number 2 is deeply structurally ingrained in Western culture. The belief that being healthy means being alone.
That hits a very raw nerve, the fear of isolation.
It is a primal fear. In American culture specifically, we have idolized the myth of the rugged individualist. We equate total health with total heroic independence. The cowboy standing alone on the frontier, needing no one.
Right.
For someone who is currently wrapped in the cocoon of psychological care or physical illness, the prospect of suddenly achieving that level of independence is secretly terrifying. There is a subconscious evolutionary fear that if they announce they are fully healed, all of their support systems, their friends, their family members, their medical team will consider their job done, pack up, and abandon them to face the world entirely alone.
Let's think about the evolutionary biology of what I call the casserole phase of illness.
The casserole phase.
Yeah, when you are sick, or when a tragedy strikes, the tribe rallies. People bring you food, they bring casseroles, they call you daily to check on your mental state. Your boss gives you immense grace if you miss a deadline or cancel plans. You are swaddled in a highly concentrated dose of community attention.
That's a great way to put it.
But if you suddenly step into the light and declare, I am 100% cured, I am vibrant, and I am thriving, the casseroles stop immediately, the daily check-ins dry up, the grace period ends, and you are expected to pull your full weight in the tribe again.
And the sudden withdrawal of that concentrated attention can feel like abandonment. The text provides a stark example of this with a woman named Beth. Beth used her chronic illness as a mechanism to command constant, unwavering attention from her family and friends.
She was really dependent on them.
Extremely. She was so terrified of isolation that she refused to even practice her daily meditations alone. She required a companion to sit with her for every single step of her so-called healing process.
Which reveals the truth. She wasn't utilizing the process to heal her body. She was utilizing the process to hold her community hostage so she would never have to be alone in a room.
Her fear of loneliness was significantly stronger than her desire for physical health. To demonstrate the alternative, Myss introduces a young man named Bart. Bart received a devastating diagnosis of leukemia.
And he handled it completely differently.
Rather than collapsing into the dependency of Beth, Bart's reaction within 48 hours was to lean into extreme independence. He dove into researching his own condition. He began independently exploring complementary mind-body treatments. And in a beautiful symbolic act, he took it upon himself to physically repaint his own apartment in specific colors that he felt would promote a tranquil, healing environment.
I want to pause on the act of repainting the apartment because that is a massive physical undertaking for someone who just received a cancer diagnosis.
It is.
It is an exertion of energy, yes, but more importantly, it is a verb. It is a physical manifestation of taking total ownership over his immediate environment. He isn't waiting for the environment to save him. He is building the environment that will sustain him.
It was an act of radical self-reliance that shattered the myth that he needed to be helpless to be cared for. The cognitive distortion at the heart of this second myth is that health equals permanent isolation.
Right.
But Myss points out that achieving health doesn't mean you stop needing human connection. You are simply forced to transition from a community built on shared neediness and crisis to a community built on shared joy, mutual growth, and equality. But bridging the gap between those two communities requires you to face the temporary, terrifying void of standing on your own 2 feet.
So we have explored how we use illness to protect our identity and how we use it to manipulate our social circles. Let's look inward at the physical vehicle itself. If myth 2 shows us that people will stay sick to avoid isolation, that implies they are willing to endure literal physical agony just to keep their friends around or avoid failure. How does the human brain justify staying in physical pain?
It requires a completely warped relationship with our own biology, which brings us to myth number 3. The belief that feeling pain means being destroyed by pain.
Explain that.
Well, we have culturally categorized all pain as the ultimate enemy, a force of pure destruction that must be silenced immediately.
We are, without question, the most heavily medicated culture in the history of human civilization. We are fundamentally pain-averse.
And that aversion blinds us to the actual function of pain. Myss specifically targets the absurdity of modern pharmaceutical marketing in the book. She points out those television commercials, we've all seen them, that advertise heavy stomach medication that you are supposed to take before you go out to eat a massive plate of greasy, spicy food.
Yes. You know those commercials? Take this pill so you can go consume a giant plate of nachos that your biological machinery is actively trying to warn you it cannot digest. It is madness when you actually deconstruct it.
It really is.
We view our bodies as these annoying, faulty machines that keep beeping at us, and our only solution is to rip the speaker wire out so we can continue abusing the machine in peace.
That analogy of the speaker wire is perfect.
Yeah.
To expand on it, what you are doing is deliberately disabling the fire alarm in your house because the high-pitched noise is interrupting your television show. Instead of pausing the show, getting up and looking for the fire in the kitchen,
Right.
Myss argues vehemently that pain is not the enemy. Pain is a highly sophisticated messenger. It is a biological and energetic teacher trying desperately to direct your conscious attention to an area of your life that is begging for repair.
Which might be physical or it might not.
Exactly. That might be a physical breakdown of tissue, or it might be a behavioral pattern that is violently out of alignment with your well-being.
I want to ask everyone listening to this to do a quick self-audit right now. Think about the last time you got a tension headache, or a severe stomach ache, or a strange recurring twinge in your lower back. What was your immediate autonomic reflex? Was it to instantly open the medicine cabinet and swallow a pill to shut the body up?
Probably.
Or did you pause for even 30 seconds to ask your physical form a question? What are you trying to communicate? Have I slept more than 4 hours? Am I carrying massive financial anxiety? Am I fueling myself with absolute garbage?
Ignoring that messenger always carries severe compounding consequences. The body will simply turn the volume up until you are forced to listen. The text illustrates this vividly with the story of a man named Fred.
What happened with Fred?
Fred suffered from a debilitating chronic backache. He went the traditional route. He saw his doctor, and the doctor correctly prescribed a series of physical therapy exercises. Fred tried the exercises for a few days, decided the return on investment was too slow, abandoned them, and demanded heavy painkillers from his doctor.
Of course he did.
He required increasingly stronger doses just to function. When Louise eventually consulted with Fred, she didn't look at his spine. She looked at his life. She asked him if he was willing to acknowledge the direct connection between his chronic back pain and his current state of severe financial stress.
Let's explain the physical mechanism of that, because it isn't magic. The lower back is literally the core support structure of the physical body. When a human being feels fundamentally unsupported in their life, often manifesting as financial terror, the nervous system is flooded with cortisol.
Yes, the stress hormone.
That stress hormone causes chronic low-grade muscle tension. Over months and years, that subconscious tension literally pulls the lumbar spine out of alignment. The body is speaking in physical metaphors.
Fred's body was screaming that he was carrying a load he could not support. Fred admitted to Myss that he knew intuitively that the stress and the pain were connected, but his response was deeply revealing.
What did he say?
He said, "Once I make my fortune, my back will heal."
Oh.
He demanded the painkiller so he could remain numb enough to make business decisions.
Oh.
He was using the medication to mask the reality that his pursuit of wealth was physically breaking his structure. He disabled the fire alarm while the house burned to the ground.
Now contrast Fred with the story of Lester.
Lester's story is intense. Lester was diagnosed with throat cancer. Throat cancer is notoriously agonizingly painful. But Lester made a radical, almost incomprehensible decision. He refused pain medication.
That sounds barbaric. Why would someone choose to endure the unmitigated agony of throat cancer?
He refused the drugs because he wanted to remain entirely razor-sharply alert. He recognized that the heavy narcotics would dull his mental focus and cloud his consciousness. He chose to use the sensation of the pain, not as a signal of his impending destruction, but as an internal geographic map.
A map.
Yes, the pain showed him precisely where the battle was raging in his tissue, and he used that sensation as a focal point to direct his intense visualization and his energetic willpower toward fighting the disease.
That is incredible.
Now, it is crucial to state clearly here. Myss is not advocating for unnecessary martyrdom. She is not suggesting that no one should ever use painkillers or palliative care.
No, obviously not.
Her argument is a paradigm shift. We must stop viewing pain exclusively as an enemy designed to destroy us and begin recognizing it as a critical, intelligent communication from our own biology. If you silence it immediately, you lose the map.
So those first 3 myths deal primarily with our identity, our fear of losing our community, and our antagonistic relationship with physical sensation. Moving into the 4th myth, we shift our focus to how we view the origin of illness itself. And this is where we need to tread carefully, because myth number 4 is a massive trap, especially within the holistic health and wellness communities. What is it?
Myth number 4 is the pervasive, damaging belief that all illness is the direct result of negativity, and therefore, if you are sick, you are damaged at your core.
Oh, this is the dark, toxic underbelly of the mind-body connection.
It really is.
It is the distortion of ideas like the secret or extreme manifestation culture.
Yeah.
The dangerous idea that if a child gets leukemia or if you develop an autoimmune disease, it is entirely your fault because you had bad vibes or you didn't meditate hard enough or you were holding on to some unhealed anger toward your mother from 1995. It is supreme victim blaming dressed up in spiritual language.
And it creates a devastating secondary crisis of guilt and self-blame. Patients who are already physically exhausted from battling a disease exhaust themselves further by endlessly excavating their past. They're desperately digging through their memories to find a missing negative experience they can blame for their tumor.
It's awful.
Myss, despite being a pioneer in energy medicine, pushes back fiercely against this simplistic equation. The text emphasizes that while the mind-body connection is an undeniable reality, human biology is infinitely more complex than bad thoughts equal bad health.
So if it isn't just unresolved trauma, what else is causing the illness in her model?
She points to the undeniable physical realities. Illness can stem from sustained exposure to environmental toxins that you have no control over. It can emerge from a genetic blueprint that you simply cannot outrun with positive thinking. And, perhaps most profoundly and controversially, Myss suggests that an illness can sometimes arrive not as a punishment, but as an answer to a prayer.
We need to unpack that carefully, an answer to a prayer. Because nobody in their right mind falls to their knees and prays for a chronic illness.
Absolutely not. But people routinely pray for deeper understanding of their own lives. They pray for a reason to finally escape a soul-crushing career. They pray for catalysts to repair a fractured family. They pray for spiritual expansion.
Right.
Myss suggests that sometimes a massive physical breakdown is the only intervention powerful enough to violently derail us from our current destructive path and force us onto a path of insight that we would otherwise never have had the courage to walk. We have to stop viewing every physical malfunction as a moral failing or a punishment for being damaged and start viewing it with immense compassion, sometimes as a tragic consequence of biology and sometimes as a brutal but necessary spiritual catalyst.
That reframing relieves the crushing, suffocating burden of holistic guilt. It allows the patient to breathe. It says, you didn't necessarily manifest this tragedy because your soul is defective. Sometimes the water is just toxic, and sometimes your life required a massive roadblock to save you from yourself.
Oh.
Which transitions us perfectly into the final defining myth that prevents healing.
Myth number 5 is the ultimate defense mechanism of the human ego. The belief that true, fundamental change is impossible. It is the internal narrative of, this is just who I am.
I'm just a hothead. I've always been anxious. My whole family is cynical.
Exactly. The entrenched belief that our core nature is fixed and immutable. Myss is compromising on this point. Healing is change. They are composed of the exact same energetic material. You cannot seek to genuinely heal a systemic physical illness without first being willing to ruthlessly examine which behavioral patterns, attitudes, and relationships need to be altered in your daily life.
But this is where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? Because people will bend over backward to avoid internal change. They will enthusiastically embrace external changes.
Oh, yeah?
I will drink a gallon of celery juice every morning. I will spend $10,000 on supplements. I will go to a yoga retreat in Costa Rica. They will change their zip code and their diet. But if you ask them to change how they process anger or how they speak to their spouse, they completely freeze.
Because external actions, drinking a green juice, do not threaten the ego. Internal change requires the ego to admit it was wrong, and in many cases requires a form of ego death. The brain literally interprets the loss of a core personality trait as a form of death.
That is so intense.
To prove that this deep, terrifying personality change is actually possible, the text shares the story of Larry. Larry suffered from severe, debilitating migraines that were ruining his life. Through therapy and self-reflection, Larry realized that his physical migraines were directly tied to his own toxic, arrogant behavior at work. The tension of his constant conflict was destroying his nervous system.
So what did he do?
Larry did something requiring almost unimaginable vulnerability. He gathered his colleagues and explicitly asked them to bluntly point out every single time he acted like a jerk, every time he was dismissive, and every time he let his arrogance dictate his behavior.
He essentially crowdsourced the destruction of his own ego. He invited his peers to dismantle his defense mechanisms in real time.
And the crucial part is, When they gave him the feedback, he didn't fight them. He didn't defend himself. He absorbed it, internalized the pain of that realization, and actively, daily, changed his personality. He proved that he was not permanently damaged at his core and that his nature was not fixed. And as he radically changed his internal landscape, releasing the constant friction of his arrogance, his severe physical migraines vanished. He cured himself by changing who he was.
It reminds me of the old proverb, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. We stay in painful, disease-inducing patterns because at least they are familiar. Change represents the ultimate, terrifying unknown.
It really does.
So the massive question hanging over this entire analysis is, if change is so biologically and psychologically terrifying, how do we possibly shift our mindset to actually want to change? How do we break the gravitational pull of these 5 myths?
That is the pivotal transition in the book. To overcome these myths, Myss argues that we cannot just tinker with our current mindset. We have to fundamentally elevate the altitude from which we view our entire existence.
We have to zoom out.
Yes. We have to move through 3 distinct stages of spiritual and historical evolution. She refers to these as the 3 levels of power and sight. And to map this out, she uses a macro-astrological context.
Okay, let's dive into this framework. And I want to give a quick caveat to the listener right now. Even if you do not follow astrology, do not check out here. Myss is using these astrological eras not as horoscopes, but as profound archetypal metaphors for the evolution of human psychology. It is a brilliant framing device.
Exactly. Treat them as historical eras of consciousness.
Yeah.
So the first level she identifies is tribal power, which correlates to the age of Aries. Historically, the age of Aries ran roughly from 2000 BC to the birth of Christ.
So we are talking about ancient history, the era of the Old Testament, the founding of early civilizations, nomadic tribes.
Correct. And the primary consciousness of humanity during this era was entirely tribal. Your individual identity did not exist separate from the group. You were your family, your tribe, your nation.
Which makes sense for survival back then.
This level of power provides immense psychological and physical safety. It provides order, fierce loyalty, and a clear moral code. If you belong to the tribe will protect you from the wolves.
But the dark side of tribalism is brutal.
The fatal weakness of tribal power is absolute rigidity, enforced conformity, and extreme xenophobia. The tribe demands that you think exactly like them. If you question the tribal laws, you are exiled, which in ancient times meant death.
Right.
And Moses points out that we still carry this tribal consciousness in our modern psyche. When we define ourselves entirely by our political party, or by a generational family grievance, or by a specific trauma support group, we are operating in tribal power.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
The text illustrates the danger of this with a man named Tyrone. Tyrone was suffering from Gulf War syndrome.
A highly complex, devastating systemic breakdown. What was Tyrone's psychological state?
Tyrone returned from the war, suffering from chronic joint pain, severe weakness, and hair loss. But his mental state was entirely consumed by a furious, righteous rage against the military and the government. He was locked in a massive tribal war against the institution he felt had poisoned and betrayed him.
He was angry.
Very. Myss had to point out to Tyrone that he was utilizing all of his precious life force, all of his daily energetic reserves, to wage this external tribal war, leaving absolutely zero energy for his own physical immune system to repair his failing body.
He was allowing the betrayal of the tribe to dictate his energetic focus, rather than prioritizing his own individual biological needs. He was bleeding out energetically on the battlefield of resentment.
Which brings us to the necessary evolution to the second level. Individual power, corresponding to the age of Pisces. This is the era stretching from the birth of Christ up to roughly the late 20th century.
The era we are just currently transitioning out of.
Yes. This era saw the revolutionary rise of the self, the Renaissance, the birth of the scientific method, the concept of individual human rights. The consciousness here is characterized by the intellect and by dualism. Everything is split into competing polarities. Good versus evil, body versus spirit, science versus religion, man versus nature.
So if tribal power is defined by the word we, individual power is defined by the word I. What is the inherent weakness of living entirely in the I?
Narcissism. An excessive, isolating, and ultimately lonely focus on the self. It is the birthplace of that rugged individualist myth we discussed earlier.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It is also the exact level of consciousness where we get trapped in endless psychoanalysis, staring at our own navels, constantly analyzing our personal history, trying to isolate the exact Tuesday in our childhood when we were broken.
Because it's all about me.
Right. It lacks a broader context. It is disconnected from the whole,
Yeah.
which is why humanity and the healing individual must evolve to the third level, symbolic power corresponding to the age of Aquarius.
The dawning of the age of Aquarius. It is a famous pop culture trope, but what does it actually mean in the context of physical and spiritual healing?
Symbolic power is the consciousness of wholeness. It is the profound ability to view the tragedies, illnesses, and challenges of your life, not as personal vindictive punishments targeted specifically at your ego, but as impersonal, archetypal lessons designed to evolve your spirit.
Impersonal lessons. I like that.
It is the recognition that we are not isolated individuals fighting the universe, but interconnected nodes in a massive global system.
It is zooming the camera way, way out.
It is the ultimate macro view. And here is where Myss executes a breathtaking synthesis of global spiritual traditions. She maps this exact evolutionary journey, from tribal survival to individual ego to symbolic connection directly onto the energy systems of the human body.
You were talking about the chakras.
Yes, she meticulously correlates the 7 Hindu chakras with the 7 Christian sacraments and the 10 Sephirot of the Jewish Kabbalah.
Wow, bringing it all together.
She argues that these 3 ancient, seemingly disparate traditions are actually mapping out the exact same biological and spiritual path of human maturity, starting at the base. The first chakra, the root, which deals entirely with tribal survival, the physical earth, the tribe, and the immune system.
Okay.
Moving upward through the solar plexus of personal power, into the heart, and finally reaching the crown chakra, which represents that high-level, symbolic, divine connection that transcends the individual ego.
That is a massive, incredibly dense synthesis of world theology. To make this actionable for the listener, we need to ground it. Let's break down the story of Ellie from the text, because Ellie's story demonstrates the actual biological mechanics of how moving from individual power to symbolic power can physically alter the cellular tissue of the body.
Ellie's story is the centerpiece of this concept. Ellie was facing her 3rd bout of cancer. A new 3rd tumor had appeared, this time in her leg. She was understandably terrified and exhausted. She was doing everything perfectly on an individual level. She had the best doctors, she changed her diet, she did her yoga, she went to therapy, but the cancer kept returning. Psychologically, she was entirely trapped in the individual mindset of, why is this happening to me? What did I do wrong?
She was taking the biological mutation personally. And let's look at what happens biologically when you are trapped in why me. You are living in a chronic state of fear and victimhood. Your nervous system is locked in a sympathetic fight-or-flight response.
Constantly.
You are flooding your body with stress hormones, which actively suppresses the immune system's ability to hunt down and destroy mutated cells.
Exactly. So Myss introduces Ellie to the synthesis of the chakras and the sacraments. She instructs Ellie to stop focusing on the tumor and instead focus on the first Christian sacrament, baptism, and connect it to the first chakra, the root.
How does that help?
Well, the first chakra connects us to the physical earth, to the fundamental community of humanity, to the raw life force of nature itself, Gaia. Baptism is the symbolic initiation into the spiritual tribe. Myss tells Ellie to visualize this profound, unbreakable connection to all of life and to direct that universal energy into her physical body.
She is essentially instructing Ellie to stop trying to kill the cancer as an isolated individual and start focusing on plugging her physical body back into the universal web of life.
Ellie goes into a deep, sustained meditation using this framework. When she emerges, she has a profound realization. She tells Myss, I didn't realize that I had completely lost touch with the energy of life itself. I need to heal my connection to life and not just focus on healing cancer.
That is a huge shift.
Huge! She successfully shifted her consciousness from individual sight to symbolic sight. She stopped fighting her body and started communing with life. She practiced this visualization daily, integrating the meaning of the chakras and sacraments. And within a month, her malignant tumor began to measurably shrink.
Let's explain the mechanism of how that happens. By shifting her energetic focus from the personal terror of my cancer to the universal awe of my connection to the earth, she shifted her nervous system out of fight or flight and into a parasympathetic state of rest and digest.
Yes, the healing state.
She stimulated her vagus nerve. She lowered her cortisol. She literally changed the frequency that her cellular tissue was receiving, bringing her immune system back online so it could perform a apoptosis-programmed cell death on the tumor. Symbolic sight is zooming out from why is this happening to me to what is this teaching me about the human experience. It removes the ego from the illness.
It is the practice of ultimate detachment, which, paradoxically, provides you with the greatest possible power. When you stop taking the illness personally, you suddenly free up massive amounts of neurological and spiritual energy that were previously being wasted on fear, resentment, and the search for blame.
And you can use that energy.
You can then consciously direct that liberated energy toward actual physical cellular repair.
Okay, this is genuinely mind-bending stuff, but it also feels incredibly daunting. If I am the listener right now, I understand the trap of woundology. I understand the 5 myths blocking my progress. I understand the intellectual need to move from individual ego to symbolic power. But how do I actually do this?
Right. How do you apply it?
Yeah, how do I take this massive abstract philosophy and apply it on a Tuesday morning when my chronic back pain flares up or my anxiety is spiking out of control?
Which brings us to the final practical section of our deep dive, igniting the healing fire within, the actionable takeaways. And the first, most vital rule Myss establishes is a harsh truth for the modern therapy culture. You must move beyond awareness.
Hey, expand on that. Because we are taught that awareness is the holy grail. Isn't achieving awareness the entire point of going to therapy?
Awareness is the starting line, not the finish line. As we discussed with the culture of the 1980s, the great seductive illusion of the New Age and modern psychological movements is the belief that simply realizing why you are broken will magically automatically fix you.
And it won't.
It won't. Myss uses a phrase in the book that is absolute perfection. Verbs heal, nouns don't.
Verbs heal, nouns don't. That is profound.
Let's break it down. Awareness, insight, analysis, diagnosis, those are all nouns. They are static concepts. They just sit there in your brain taking up space. I have an attachment disorder. I have chronic fatigue. Those are nouns.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Forgive, walk, change, release, nourish. Those are verbs. They require motion. They require physical and emotional exertion. If you sit in a room for 10 years analyzing the exact mechanics of your childhood trauma, you are just collecting a very expensive jar of nouns. You have to take physical action in the present moment to change your biology.
The danger of therapy is that it can become a noun collection agency. You get a dopamine hit every time you find a new label for your pain, but you never actually do the unglamorous, grueling work of changing your behavior. So what does a healing verb look like on a practical level?
It means living fiercely in the present and embracing cyclic thinking. One of the biggest roadblocks is paralysis by analysis. People stop waiting for the perfect treatment plan before they start. They read 20 books on allopathic medicine, 30 books on alternative medicine. They consult 6 specialists, and they do absolutely nothing because they are terrified of making the wrong choice.
So they freeze.
And Yumi says, start somewhere today. Introduce a verb immediately, even if it is incredibly small. Change your diet today. Walk 1 mile today. Sign up for a meditation class today. Just introduce a new current of physical energy into your stagnant routine.
Do not let the pursuit of the perfect protocol become the enemy of good action. But here's the reality. What happens when you start and you don't see results right away? I ate organic kale for 3 weeks. I went to therapy twice, and my arthritis is still flaring up. This is all garbage. That is when people quit.
And that quitting is a failure of linear thinking. We have been conditioned by the modern medical model to expect a straight, immediate line. I input the pill, I immediately output the cure. I input the good behavior, I output immediate health.
Right.
Myss counters this by pointing to the ancient wisdom of the Tao Te Ching and the concept of cyclic thinking. Nature does not operate in straight lines. It operates in seasons. There's a time for planting seeds in the dark, a time for explosive growth, a time for harvest, and a time for winter retrenchment.
Just like healing.
True healing works the exact same way. If you radically change your diet or start deep emotional work and you do not see physical results in 30 days, you must not panic.
Because the changes are happening underground. The roots are growing in the dark before the sprout breaks the soil.
Precisely. Energetic and spiritual changes must happen first. The emotional shifts have to take root in your nervous system before the dense physical tissue of your body can follow suit. Matter is the densest form of energy. It is the slowest to change. You have to trust the cycle of the season.
Which leads us to the final and perhaps the most psychologically difficult, actionable piece of the puzzle. Embracing the mystery.
You have to stop asking, why me? You have to resign from your self-appointed job as the lead detective of your own illness. In psychological and statistical terms, major life events, illnesses, tragedies, accidents, are what we call overdetermined.
Overdetermined. Let's define that. It means there isn't just one single cause, that produce the effect.
Exactly. An overdetermined event has so many contributing factors: genetics, environmental toxins, daily stress levels, the spiritual catalyst, sheer random chaotic chance, that it is literally impossible to ever isolate one single
So
cause.
you can't just blame one thing.
Searching for the one specific reason you got sick is a fool's errand. It is a massive drain on the precise energy reserves you desperately need to actually heal. You must practice radical acceptance that you are living a mystery, not solving a math equation.
You are living a mystery, not solving one. I want to pose a question directly to you, the listener, right now as we are near the end of this deep dive. Look at your own life. Look at the chronic physical pain, the recurring emotional hurdle, or the toxic relationship dynamic you are currently struggling with. Are you secretly waiting for permission to heal? Are you waiting to figure out exactly why it happened, perfectly diagnosing the past before you take a single step forward? Are you treating your healing journey like a noun to be studied on a whiteboard, or a verb to be executed in the messy reality of today?
That is the ultimate question. Because when you strip it all away, this book is a massive, unapologetic challenge to everyone. It challenges the conventional allopathic medical community to look beyond just the physical mechanics of the flesh and acknowledge the spirit.
Yeah.
But equally, and perhaps more intensely, it challenges the holistic and New Age communities to look beyond comfortable therapy buzzwords and the seductive comfort of victimhood. It forces us all to confront the raw, terrifying, and beautiful reality of our own willpower, our accountability, and our spiritual maturity.
It essentially demands that we grow up, spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
It does. And the book leaves us with a truly fascinating, deeply unexpected metaphor in its epilogue to tie all of this together. After exploring all this heavy theology and biology, Myss compares the healing journey to the classic fairy tale of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
I have to admit, I did not see a Disney princess metaphor coming at the end of a dense book on energy medicine and trauma. How does Snow White fit into the chakra system?
It is brilliant when you look at it archetypally. Think about the structure of this story. Snow White represents our higher self, our pure potential, but she is poisoned by a toxic apple, which perfectly represents the myth of the wound, our negative beliefs, and the toxic culture of woundology. She bites the apple and falls into a deep, unconscious slumber. The seven dwarfs represent the seven energy centers of the body, the chakras. They are the ones out working every day, digging in the dark subterranean mines, working through the gritty, difficult reality of our physical and emotional lives.
So the higher consciousness is asleep, poisoned by victimhood, while the body's energy centers are just grinding away in the dark, trying to keep things functioning.
Exactly. And the ultimate goal of the story, and the goal of healing, is to wake up. We have to stop letting our bruised ego fight our higher self. We have to do the difficult work to purify those seven energy centers, integrate the tireless work of the dwarfs, spit out the poisoned apple of our victimhood, and wake up from our unconscious slumber to take active, conscious charge of our lives.
Spit out the poison and wake up. What an incredible, vivid image to end our analysis on.
It perfectly encapsulates the journey from passive victim to active creator.
As we close out this deep dive, custom tailored for your exploration of the human mind, I want to take us all the way back to where we started. Back to that quiet doctor's office, back to the hum of the x-ray machine.
A little circle.
Yeah, we started by acknowledging that we all crave the clean, black and white certainty of a broken bone on an illuminated screen. We desperately want healing to be a simple external transaction, a pill we swallow, a cast we wear.
But it's not.
No. As Caroline Myss has so forcefully demonstrated, the reality of human health is beautifully, terrifyingly complex. It is an intricate, inseparable web of biology, biography, and spiritual energy. So the next time you feel a pain, whether it is a physical ache in your spine or an emotional ache in your chest, don't just reach for the off switch.
Don't disable the alarm.
Exactly. Don't immediately disable the fire alarm to protect your comfort. Lean into the discomfort. Ask what the mystery is trying to teach you about your life. And above all else, remember, verbs heal, nouns don't. Keep asking the hard questions, keep doing the internal work. We highly recommend you read Why People Don't Heal and How They Can if this resonated with you.
It's an absolute must-read.
We invite you to subscribe to the Book Nook so you never miss an episode.
Yes, please subscribe.
And we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us which book you'd like us to explore next. We read every single one. See you next time.